I grew up in on a farm in the outskirts of Cork City. It was a small farm. It was back in the 1960s. Our farm was not only the place where we were nurtured and reared, but it was also our playground. It was a mixed farm with cows, chickens, pigs. We grew veg. We grew barley and oats, and we grew beet to feed the cows. We milked at the time about 20 or 30 cows. We had every cow had a name. We drank their milk, raw milk. The ditches we played in, the farm was full of ditches, small fields and ditches. And the ditches we played in endlessly were our Amazon. They were our just an amazing playground. We knew the names of all the trees. We had an orchard. So basically, and we were self-sufficient food-wise, bar maybe buying sugar, eggs, and flour probably. Sorry, I think it was tea actually. Yeah, no, tea, sugar, and flour. We had the eggs. We had hens as well. I remember the heralding. Spring was heralded by the call of the cuckoo and the corncrake. And that is in Glanmire, which is not too long ago, when the corncrake was very much in evidence in Glanmire. So those memories have nurtured me as an adult all my life. Not a day passes at some point that I'm not transported back to the beauty and to the peace of that childhood, and the smells of hay and just flowers, and even farmyard smells, a lot of them that are quite different now. They were nice smells then. So nature was my sanctuary, and so I really am passionate about the importance of it to both physical and mental health right throughout your life. And it is difficult to see the disconnection that there is now between children and the natural world. And by the time I was 14, of course, everything had changed. Ireland had joined the EEC, as it was known as then became the EU. And suddenly the farm changed from being a beautiful place to one that was basically there to make money. The ditches were taken out, the orchard was removed. There was a milking parlour set up, which is now actually, again, a ruin. It's in ruins. It's no longer used because it's now too small, because factory farming has taken over. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things there in terms of well, first of all, referring back to the speakers. Emma showed us about just how important understanding nature was, and what she was able to do with through her understanding of nature, and the amount of wildlife that she has actually been able to support just as a result of that information. Maria was a great message from Maria, that how quickly nature can respond when we actually give it a chance. And that community work is amazing. And I'm saying this because I think that hope is really important. And it's very easy to lose hope if we look at what's happening globally. But when we go back down to our own communities and we see actually what can happen when we actually do take action ourselves. Catherine was very interesting because she was asking questions like, you know, what does it mean to the rivers? How do you give a voice to the river, give a voice to the animals that live in the river, and what would they say, and how could you help them? And I think that they're really important questions. And then James and the relationship, developing that relationship with the river, and laws don't really work, he said. We need to go deeper. And it's that depth of connection that I just want to explore very briefly here. I think educators, parents, planners, parents, grandparents, we all need to understand that the relationship to nature is crucial to the protection of nature. If you don't love something, it's difficult to protect it, or to be really convinced that you need to protect it. But if you love it, you will actually do everything you can to protect it. And I think from the point of view of educators, we need to bring that kind of connection back into schools. Can we provide opportunities for the children to connect? We are part of nature and the web of life. And how can we do that? There's no room really for complacency in this anymore. Can we fit all of this into the existing systems? Can we modify the curriculum so that we actually bring nature center and the regeneration of nature? So I think Elaine has joined us now, so maybe there's a few more things that we can chat about, Elaine.
Yeah, thanks very much, Helen, and thanks, Denise, as well. I'm Elaine Nevin. I'm the National Director with Eco-UNESCO, and I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. So I'm going to be moderating this discussion with Helen and Saoirse. I suppose my organisation, we're an environmental education and youth organisation, so we're very focused on engaging and educating young people, getting them involved, amplifying young people's voice. And I suppose over the years, and what I've heard this morning, and I've been very inspired, I suppose, in terms of the inputs from the young people here today around, I suppose, the innovation and the solutions I think that you've come up with. And I think it's very much where we would see young people, getting them around the table, giving them the voice, and hearing from them. Certainly, I've been here all morning. Similar to Helen, I suppose I grew up in nature on a farm in the west of Ireland, and developed a very strong sense of connection to nature as well. And I've been very inspired, I suppose, hearing, I suppose, the messages of hope, I think, that have come through, and the regeneration of nature. But also, I think, for me, hearing the actual impacts on that global perspective, just from our last two speakers, I mean, I think it really brings home that impact, the huge impact of climate change and the extreme weather patterns. So it's been great to hear everybody this morning. Helen, thank you so much for that introduction. And I think that, as you were saying there, the sense of hope is so important. And I suppose we feel, I suppose what I've seen over the years is that young people are feeling anxious and concerned about their futures. And I think that maybe older generations as well are also feeling that, but there's something about how do we all work together, I think, and move forward. Saoirse, I'm going to bring you in now. And if you could also maybe tell us a little bit about why maybe you've gotten involved, a little bit about your story maybe so far, and you getting involved in all of this, and then any sort of initial thoughts that you've had on what you've heard this morning.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Saoirse. I'm 18 and I literally just finished school in June, so I know how everyone is feeling in terms of school. I got involved with climate activism in 2019. I started school striking. So every single Friday, I did not go to school and I protested on the streets of Limerick City, which is where I'm from. And I think for me, it was protest and striking was a way to highlight the fact that, in school, we're always taught that we have to work towards our future. We're taught that if we work hard, we will achieve a certain profession and we will live the lives that our parents might have lived, or even a better one. But the reality is our future is crumbling before our very eyes, and it's very terrifying. So I think for me, it was a way to express the fact that it was that sentiment of, why should I go to school? Why should I study for my future when I might not even have one? So I think that was a big thing for me. And then I became involved in the Irish Second Level Students' Union, which is a network of more than 500 secondary schools across the country. And I was a quality officer with them. And essentially that, again, was a similar thing, was addressing the injustice that is often sort of put towards young people, the fact that in school environments we often don't have the ability to input into what we can wear, what we learn, what we can even say or do, and so that was a big thing for me as well. And it also introduced me to the legislative side of climate action, and how we need, I think I learned that we need both the pressure on the streets, but also the people inside the government, inside the institutions, and I carried that with me for the rest of my activism. More recently, I was selected to the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change as the representative for Western Europe. And so dealing with the UN on a broader level, and on a higher level, I suppose, being involved in the UN, has really taught me that protest and is one of the most powerful things that we can do. Getting out in the streets, expressing our opinions, expressing our anger is one of the most powerful things we can do. So I think that's my journey sort of summarized very quickly. But I unfortunately wasn't able to be here all morning today because I did have another call. But I think that from what I heard the last two speakers, and it's very important for us to listen to the people who are in the most affected places and areas, most affected by the climate crisis, that is, peoples and areas, sorry. Because the reality is that we are all experiencing the climate crisis in a very unequal way. As was highlighted by the last two speakers, Africa, for example, is the continent I think contributes the least to the climate crisis, and yet is experiencing some of the worst effects. And the reality is, us here in countries like Ireland and across the rest of Western Europe and the West in general, we are not necessarily experiencing the effects, but we are responsible for most of the carbon emissions, if not all of them. Well, not all of them, but the vast majority anyway. And so I think it's really important to recognize that even though we might not be experiencing the effects, we are responsible for them, and that we will experience them. So I would take a lot of the things being experienced right now in countries and continents like Africa as a warning for what we could potentially begin experiencing in the next couple of years, which is really scary. But I think it's important to be a little bit scared with this. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Saoirse. And I mean, I think I know from our work as well, I mean, we're always hearing from young people who are talking about, I suppose, that sense of overwhelm and maybe anxiety as well. And I do think, and I know, Helen, you've talked about this as well, that sense of hope, I suppose, and hopefulness, and maybe trying to sort of counter the hopelessness. I'd just be interested to know, like, what I suppose we all want to know, continuously. I suppose anyone who works with people, it's always like, how can we empower and not overwhelm, and how can we engage people and give that hope? So I don't know, Helen or Saoirse, I mean, as I say, either of you can come into any of these questions that we're asking, and really is like, it is a conversation. We want to get a chat going.
I think, first of all, it's really important to be aware of overwhelm, and not to overfeed your brain and your mind with stuff and with stories about it. I think it's really, really important that you say, right, enough is enough now. I'm going to ground myself. I'm going to get out into nature. I'm going to go and look at things. I'm going to go and notice what's going on in nature, because nature has been here long, long, long before we actually evolved on the earth. So there are answers there. There is no doubt. I think we have to be humble enough and step back a little bit and be patient enough to see, okay, what is going on, and then take small steps to do the things that you can do. And sometimes that can be really, really rewarding, a bit like putting in the pond, like Maria was saying, and then seeing all the life that comes back within a very, very short space of time. That nature is powerful. We are part of nature. As Jim said, we are absolutely 100% part of nature, and we are part of the ecosystem. And we won't solve this through politics alone. And if we look to the powers that be and the authorities and the legislators to solve these things, it will not happen unless we get right down at community level and start doing things that really make a difference to our lives. And I think that is key, developing that relationship. And it should be, I believe, key in the curriculum in every school, that nature comes right into the classroom. And we can take so many messages and lessons from nature, and how nature deals with things, and how everything in nature has its place. And unfortunately, we as human beings have overstepped the mark, hugely overstepped where we are, and we are now, becoming such a dominant species that we are altering literally our own environment. So let's get back down and see. Let's just take a few steps back and get out into nature. I think that's the first thing we realize that a lot of children never get involved in nature now, and to me that is such a tragic loss to their lives. So it's up to everyone, all generations, to make sure that happens. And it's up to our educators and our planners and our policymakers to make sure that children have access to green spaces, they have access to the outdoors, and that it is valued as much in the educational system as any degrees or any kind of academic education.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Helen. Thank you. And yeah, I suppose that whole access to green spaces, I think, is so important, isn't it? You know, and the value that's placed, or the lack of value maybe sometimes that's placed on that. I mean, Saoirse, in terms of your perspective, from a young person's perspective, you know, that sense of hope, maybe, you know, or maybe the hopelessness sometimes, but you don't want that, you know what I mean? We have to continue to be hopeful. So how important is that for young people, and how do you think we can foster it?
I think hope is very important, because in some ways, you know, I have experienced hopelessness myself. I still do. I don't know if I'm 100% hopeful, but I do think in many ways it does help to prevent this kind of, prevent just giving up on everything. The issue is, I think a lot of people, like, you have to walk a very fine line between hope that is apathetic and hope that is actually reasonable. So we have to admit that, for example, we are facing planetary breakdown. We are facing the climate crisis. We are facing the breakdown of ecosystems. And this is real. It's terrifying, but we have to face it. On the other hand, I think we also have to recognize that humans have the potential to actually backtrack on what we've done, as Helen was saying, and we have the potential as well. We're not necessarily these destructive creatures. We're not parasites. I think there's this very strong notion that if humans no longer existed on the planet, if we left tomorrow, the planet would be so much better off. Or if we destroy the planet doesn't care, it'll bounce back. Or no, if we destroy ourselves, the planet doesn't care, it'll bounce back in a couple of years anyway. And I think that really takes away the contributions that humans have made to our planet. For example, you know, we have altered the environment for a long time, and often in a positive way. If you look at Indigenous communities in Australia, for example, a lot of them altered the environment in order to make it better for game, in order to make it better for certain plants. So to the extent where when settlers came to Australia and colonized the land and pushed the rightful owners off the land, the soil became arid and dry and sandy, and these grasses took over rather than the sort of, oh God, the word has gone from my head, but the plants that were there before. So I think it is really important to recognize that as humans, we do alter the environment, but it's just in what way do we do it? How do we value the environment? And I think it's in terms of going back to hope, I think it's also important sometimes to feel that grief, to feel that anger, to feel that frustration. I think those are the emotions that really drove the climate movement to happen, you know, drove people out onto the streets protesting because we were angry, especially as young people, because I think we look towards particularly those that are in power and those that have been in power for generations and what they've done to the planet. I think we look towards that with a lot of anger. It's not fair. We haven't even had the chance to get into power yet, and yet we're having to deal with what older generations, or particularly older generations in power, have done. And so I think it's important to feel that lack of hope, to recognize it, and because if we don't, I think it is sort of a willful ignorance that only the most privileged can afford. So I think for young people, for me anyway, the biggest antidote to hopelessness has always been getting out on the streets, has always been protesting, has always been talking directly to my representatives and kind of re-emphasizing the fact that young people are young people are human, and we are just as much a part of society as adults. We might not be able to vote, but we are there, and our futures we're closer to future generations than other generations, and so therefore our voices are perhaps the most important in climate discussions. So I think that's a big antidote to hopelessness for me.
And in terms of, say, I mean, you mentioned about protests there being really important. the thing, I mean, I suppose young people coming up with solutions, where do you see that fitting in?
I think that's definitely important as well. We have to have solutions. The issue is, I think a lot of solutions already exist. It's just governments, there's a lack of kind of political will within governments. I think there's a lot of will, there's a large amount of will from the general populace, from young people, from older people, from all generations, all types of, all groups of people. But I think the issue is the lack of political will. We've developed solutions. We have things like sustainable energy, for example, and obviously there are some issues with electric vehicles, for example, which use minerals like lithium, which have to be mined from the soil and have a lot of environmental impacts. But you also have things like wind turbines, which generally are quite good for the environment. So I think the solutions are there. It's just a matter of actually implementing them. And yeah, definitely the more solutions we come up with, the better. But how do we actually make sure that governments listen to people? How do we actually make sure that these solutions are not just kind of thrown on the pile of all the solutions we've already developed? How do we make sure that they're implemented and they're meaningful and tangible within going through governmental and political structures?
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. I don't know, Helen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think all that makes absolute sense. Yeah. Sometimes solutions are quite simple as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's to understand that. And I think understanding is really, really key. Understanding nature and the cycles of life and how species interact with one another. And I think funding research is really, really important to address the climate change issue and the biodiversity loss issue. I think funding of research, it needs to be given priority in the research in these areas. Yeah, because it's only when we understand something we'll actually come up with the right solutions. There can be solutions like walls along riverbanks. It's not the right solution. Definitely. I mean, I think I was struck this morning by I think people talking about this, wilding, rewilding, and all of these, and I suppose the idea that people, they sound like small things that people are doing, but that once people see other people doing it, there's a whole kind of peer-to-peer thing and peer pressure that goes on, and people kind of look at each other for inspiration. And so there are solutions that can be small and there are solutions that can be big, and you can scale up things as well. I was interested, I suppose this morning I was particularly interested in James. He was talking about the rights of nature. So I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on, that idea, that concept, that, the rights of nature. Nature often, when we're sitting around the table, and especially as a young person, people, you have a voice there. But, we always say, like, the environment, and any of us working in the environmental field, we're doing it all the time. We're talking for nature, we're the voice of nature, we're talking for it. So you have people who are embodying, and we are of course part of nature, but we're bringing it to the table. So how about, what are your thoughts on that the rights of nature?
I think it is very, very important for us to recognize that I think there is a saying, I don't remember who coined the term, but it's been used a lot in the environmental movement, and it's, we are nature defending itself. And I think it's very important to recognize that in our societies, for some reason, we have begun to see ourselves as separate from nature. We have looked upon ourselves and decided that by some kind of strange hierarchy, we are the dominant life force. And I think it's really harmful because I've been reading recently about this idea of social ecology, and it's really interesting because part of social ecology is how humans have imposed human hierarchies, or the idea of human hierarchies, onto nature. So we look at a lion and we call it the king of the jungle, for example, without recognizing that the bacteria in the soil that breaks down the lion after it has died is just as important as the lion itself. Or even in biology, we learn about like food webs and the transfer of energy and from one organism to another, and apex predators and this kind of thing. But the reality is, it's a circle. You can't really enter into an ecosystem in one place, and it just goes, really linear in terms of how energy is transferred. So I think there's this understanding, we've developed this understanding of nature as something that is very separate from us, and that actually moves in the same ways that our societies do. And we've tried to understand nature in a very human way, which doesn't make any sense because nature is not human. I think we need to maybe flip it a little bit. Instead of looking at nature and seeing human patterns, we need to look at ourselves and see natural patterns. And I think the importance and the reality is we're not just bringing the voice of nature to the table. We're also, like, as I mentioned before, we are nature defending itself. So I think it's really, really important to reestablish that connection, and to ensure that you know, when we actually advocate for the rights of nature, sorry, I've lost my train of thought a little bit here, but I think essentially the natural world is a part of us, and the reality is, if we lose it, we lose not just ourselves but our heritage, our culture. You know, in the Irish language we have words that distinctly mean give specific meaning to, for example, that, you know, we have 32 words for field, so each field has a specific meaning, has a specific purpose in the Irish language. And if we lose biodiversity, we lose the ability to, well, we lose the context through which we can use those words, and those words are in turn lost. So I think we have to recognize that human culture and human existence is so deeply intertwined in nature, precisely because we're a part of it. So I think definitely recognizing the rights of nature, for example, stopping ecocide, which is the basically excessive harm of nature, is really, really vital. And we need to recognize that. Also, I think another thing we have to recognize is that the destruction of nature feeds directly into the destruction of human well-being and human life. To go on a bit of a tangent, I suppose, you know, there are studies that show when people are around more trees, we tend to be calmer. We tend to deal with anxiety in a more effective way. You know, I think it's just really important to recognize fundamentally, in summary, I guess, that we are not separate from nature, that we are part of an ecosystem, that we have separated ourselves. So yeah.
Okay, brilliant, Saoirse. Thank you so much. I think we're about out of time. Thank you, everybody. I mean, Helen, I'm assuming that in the rights of nature, you may agree that yes, we should be doing that. Just
very briefly, I absolutely I think the rights of nature and that whole movement is essential. I just think that it can't stand alone, that we can't be just dependent on the rule of law to protect rivers and nature. We've got to actually really go deeper, as James said, and develop that relationship with
absolutely. Yeah, so it's kind of a two-pronged approach, really, I think is what we're saying. So thank you very much, Saoirse and Helen.